Emma had always dreamed of her wedding day. She imagined walking down the aisle surrounded by family and friends, her heart full of joy. But just a week before the big day, her world came crashing down. She was in her wedding dress, laughing with her bridesmaids when her phone rang. It was the venue manager. "I'm so sorry, Emma," he said, his voice hesitant. "Your wedding has been canceled." Her heart stopped. "What do you mean canceled?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Your parents called earlier today. They said the wedding is off and asked for a refund." Emma's hands shook as she hung up the phone. She couldn't believe it. Her parents had canceled her wedding behind her back. She rushed home, her mind racing. Her parents were sitting in the living room, calm and composed as if nothing had happened. "Why?" she demanded, her voice breaking. Her father looked up from his newspaper, his expression cold. "We don't approve of Jake," he said simply. "He's not the right man for you." Her mother nodded, adding, "We did what we thought was best for you, Emma. You'll thank us one day." Emma felt like the ground had been ripped out from under her. She had always known her parents weren't Jake's biggest fans, but she never thought they would go this far. "This is my life," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "You had no right to do this." But her parents didn't budge. They were convinced they had saved her from a terrible mistake. That night, Emma sat with Jake, tears streaming down her face. "I can't believe they did this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake held her hand, his face filled with determination. "We don't need their approval," he said firmly. "Let's get married anyway. But let's do it our way." Emma looked at him, a spark of hope igniting in her chest. "What do you mean?" she asked. Jake smiled. "Let's have a wedding they'll never forget. Something so unbelievable, they'll realize they can't control us." Emma's mind began to race. She thought about all the times her parents had tried to dictate her life, her career, her relationships, even her hobbies. This was her chance to take control. "Let's do it," she said, her voice steady. "But we have to keep it a secret. If they find out, they'll try to stop us again." The next few days were a whirlwind of planning. Emma and Jake decided to get married at sunrise on a secluded beach, just the two of them and a few close friends. They found an officiant who was willing to keep the ceremony quiet, and Emma's best friend Sarah helped her find a simple but beautiful dress. Jake's brother, Chris, handled the logistics, making sure everything was in place. It wasn't the grand wedding Emma had always imagined, but it felt right. It felt like them. As the days passed, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that her parents were watching her every move. She caught her mother snooping through her phone once, and her father kept asking strange questions about her plans. But Emma stayed strong. She wasn't going to let them ruin this. The night before the wedding, Emma's parents sat her down for a family talk. Her father started, his tone serious. "Emma, we know you're planning something. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Her mother chimed in, her voice pleading. "We just want what's best for you. Jake isn't the right man for you. Please cancel whatever you're planning." Emma felt a surge of anger, but she kept her voice calm. "You don't get to decide what's best for me," she said. "This is my life, and I'm going to live it my way." Her parents exchanged a look, but Emma didn't wait for their response. She walked out, her heart pounding. She wasn't going to let them stop her. The next morning, Emma and Jake stood on the beach as the sun rose over the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, and the sound of the waves filled the air. It was perfect. As they exchanged vows, Emma felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in weeks. This was her moment, and no one could take it away from her. But just as the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Emma heard a familiar voice. "Emma, stop!" She turned to see her parents running toward them, their faces filled with anger. Her father reached them first, his face red. "What do you think you're doing?" he demanded. Emma took a deep breath and looked him straight in the eye. "I'm getting married," she said, her voice steady. "And there's nothing you can do to stop me." Her mother started to cry, but Emma didn't back down. "You had your chance to be part of this," she said, But you chose to control me instead of supporting me. This is my life, and I'm living it on my terms." Her parents stood there, stunned into silence. Emma turned back to Jake, took his hand, and walked away, leaving her parents behind. As they reached the car, Emma felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She had done it. She had taken control of her life, and nothing felt better. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she knew she and Jake could face anything together. And as they drove off into the sunrise, Emma couldn't help but smile. This was just the beginning of their unbelievable journey. A few weeks after the wedding, life began to settle into a new rhythm for Emma and Jake. They moved into a small apartment together, far enough from her parents to feel free but close enough to the beach to remind them of that unforgettable morning. Emma felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years, but deep down she couldn't shake the lingering hurt from her parents' actions. She hadn't spoken to them since the wedding, and the silence between them felt heavy, like a storm waiting to break. One afternoon, as Emma was unpacking a box of wedding photos, her phone buzzed. It was a text from her mother. "Emma, we need to talk, please." Her heart raced. She hadn't expected this. Part of her wanted to ignore it, to keep the distance between them, but another part of her wondered if this was her chance to finally clear the air. She showed the text to Jake, who gave her a reassuring nod. "It's up to you," he said. "But if you want to talk to them, I'll be right here." Emma took a deep breath and typed back, "Okay." When? They agreed to meet at a quiet cafe the next day. Emma arrived first, her stomach in knots. She ordered a coffee and sat at a corner table, her hands trembling slightly. When her parents walked in, they looked different. Smaller almost. Her father's usual confident stride was gone, replaced by a hesitant shuffle. Her mother's eyes were red, as if she'd been crying. They sat down across from her, and for a moment no one spoke. Finally, her mother broke the silence. "Emma, we're so sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "We were wrong. We thought we were protecting you, but we realize now that we were just trying to control you." Emma stared at them, unsure of how to respond. Her father cleared his throat. "We've had a lot of time to think," he said. "And we realize that we've been holding you back. You're strong, Emma. Stronger than we ever gave you credit for. And Jake, he's a good man. We see that now." Emma felt a lump form in her throat. She had waited so long to hear these words, but now that they were here, she didn't know how to feel. "Why now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why did it take you so long to see that?" Her mother reached across the table, but Emma pulled her hand back. "We were scared," her mother admitted. "Scared of losing you, scared of not being able to control your life the way we thought we should. But we realize now that we've already lost you because of our own actions." Her father nodded. "We don't expect you to forgive us right away," he said, "but we want to try to make things right if you'll let us." Emma sat there, her mind racing. She had spent so long being angry at them, feeling betrayed and hurt. But now, seeing them like this, vulnerable and apologetic, she felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of her wanted to forgive them, to rebuild the relationship they once had. But another part of her was still guarded, afraid of being hurt again. "I need time," she said finally. "I can't just forget everything that happened. But I'm willing to try. For all of us." Her parents nodded, their eyes filled with a mix of relief and sadness. They talked for a little while longer, the conversation awkward but honest. When they left, Emma felt a strange sense of closure. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. She walked back to her apartment, where Jake was waiting for her. "How did it go?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her. Emma sighed, leaning into his embrace. "It was hard," she said, "but I think it was the right thing to do. They're not perfect, but they're still my parents, and I think they're finally starting to see that I'm not a little girl anymore." Jake kissed the top of her head. "I'm proud of you," he said. "You handled that better than I ever could." Emma smiled, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. She knew there would still be challenges ahead, But for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. With Jake by her side and a newfound sense of independence, she was ready to face whatever came next. And as she looked out the window at the setting sun, she couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope for the future. Months passed, and Emma and Jake settled into their new life together. The tension with her parents slowly began to ease, though it was far from perfect. They started meeting for occasional lunches, and while the conversations were still awkward at times, there was a sense of progress. Emma's parents made an effort to include Jake, inviting him to family dinners and even asking about his work. It wasn't the warm, loving relationship Emma had always hoped for, but it was a step in the right direction. She knew rebuilding trust would take time, and she was willing to give it that. One evening, as Emma and Jake were relaxing at home, her phone buzzed with a message from her mother. "We'd like to throw you a belated wedding celebration," it read. "Nothing big, just a small gathering with close family and friends. We want to make up for what we did." Emma stared at the message, her heart pounding. She showed it to Jake, who raised an eyebrow. "What do you think?" he asked. Emma hesitated. The idea of her parents hosting a celebration for their wedding felt strange, almost surreal. But part of her wondered if this was their way of truly making amends. "I don't know," she said slowly. "It feels weird, but maybe it's a good thing. Maybe it's their way of showing they've changed." After much discussion, Emma decided to give it a chance. She replied to her mother, agreeing to the celebration but setting clear boundaries. "It has to be small," she wrote, "and Jake and I get final say on everything." Her mother quickly agreed, and the planning began. Emma couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions: hope, skepticism, and a lingering fear that her parents might try to take control again. But she reminded herself that she was in charge now. This was her life, and she wouldn't let anyone dictate it. The day of the celebration arrived, and Emma was nervous. She and Jake arrived at the venue, a cozy garden her parents had rented, and were greeted by a small group of close family and friends. The atmosphere was warm and welcoming, and Emma felt a flicker of relief. Her parents approached them, her mother holding a small gift. "We're so glad you're here," she said, her voice sincere. "We just want to celebrate you two and the life you're building together." Emma accepted the gift, her heart softening just a little. "Thank you," she said quietly. "This means a lot." As the evening went on, Emma found herself relaxing. The celebration was simple but heartfelt, with heartfelt speeches from friends and even a few kind words from her parents. Her father stood up to speak, his voice trembling slightly. "Emma, Jake, we made a lot of mistakes," he said. "But seeing you two together, so happy and strong, has made us realize how wrong we were. We're proud of you, and we're grateful you've given us a chance to be part of your lives again." Emma felt tears well up in her eyes. She hadn't expected this level of vulnerability from her father, and it touched her deeply. By the end of the night, Emma felt a sense of closure she hadn't realized she needed. It wasn't a perfect resolution. There were still scars from the past, but it was a new beginning. As she and Jake drove home, she leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "I think they're really trying," she said softly. Jake nodded, squeezing her hand. "They are, and so are you. That's what matters." In the weeks that followed, Emma noticed a shift in her relationship with her parents. They were more respectful of her boundaries, more willing to listen rather than dictate. It wasn't always easy. Old habits die hard, but Emma could see the effort they were making. And for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful about the future. She had fought for her happiness, stood up for herself, and in doing so, had not only changed her own life, but also her relationship with her parents. It wasn't the fairy tale she had imagined as a little girl, but it was real, and it was hers. And that was more than enough. As the seasons changed, so did Emma's life. The belated wedding celebration had marked a turning point in her relationship with her parents, but it also sparked something deeper within her. She began to reflect on how far she had come, from the heartbroken woman whose wedding was canceled to the confident, independent person she was now. She realized that standing up to her parents had been about more than just her wedding. It had been about reclaiming her voice and her right to make her own choices. One day, while cleaning out an old box of memories, Emma stumbled across her wedding planning notebook. Flipping through the pages, she saw all the dreams and ideas she had poured into it, the color schemes, the guest lists, the little details she had been so excited about. It felt like a lifetime ago. She showed it to Jake, who smiled as he flipped through it. "You put so much work into this," he said. "It's kind of sad that it never happened the way you planned." Emma nodded, but then she smiled. "It didn't happen the way I planned," she said, "but it happened the way it was meant to. Our wedding was perfect because it was ours, no one else's." Jake pulled her into a hug. "You're amazing, you know that?" he said. Emma laughed, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She had come to realize that her strength wasn't just in standing up to her parents, but in embracing the unexpected and finding joy in it. Their wedding on the beach with the sunrise and the sound of the waves had been more meaningful than any grand ceremony could have been. It was a reflection of who they were as a couple, unconventional, resilient, and deeply in love. A few months later, Emma received a surprise invitation in the mail. It was from a local women's empowerment group, asking her to speak at an upcoming event about overcoming adversity and finding her voice. At first, she was hesitant. She had never considered herself a public speaker, and the idea of sharing her story with a roomful of strangers was intimidating. But Jake encouraged her. "You have an incredible story to tell," he said, "and if it helps even one person, it'll be worth it." Emma decided to take the leap. She spent weeks preparing her speech, reflecting on everything she had been through: the betrayal, the heartbreak, the empowerment, and the healing. When the day of the event arrived, she stood on the stage, her heart pounding as she looked out at the audience. But as she began to speak, her nerves melted away. She talked about the moment she found out her wedding had been canceled, the pain of feeling like her parents didn't trust her choices, and the strength it took to stand up for herself. She shared how she and Jake had created their own version of a perfect wedding, one that was true to who they were. The audience listened intently, and when she finished, the room erupted into applause. Afterward, several women approached her, tears in their eyes, thanking her for sharing her story. One woman in particular stood out. She was young, barely in her 20s, and she looked at Emma with a mix of awe and gratitude. "Your story really touched me," she said. "I've been struggling with my family too, and hearing you talk about standing up for yourself, it gave me hope." "Thank you," Emma felt a lump form in her throat. She had never imagined that her story could have such an impact. As she left the event that night, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Her journey hadn't just been about her. It had been about showing others that they too could take control of their lives and find happiness on their own terms. In the months that followed, Emma continued to share her story, speaking at events and even starting a blog where she wrote about her experiences. She connected with people from all walks of life, each with their own struggles and triumphs. Through it all, Jake remained her biggest supporter, cheering her on every step of the way. And while her relationship with her parents still had its ups and downs, she knew they were trying, and that was enough for now. As she looked back on everything she had been through, Emma realized that her journey had been about more than just a wedding. It had been about finding her voice, standing up for herself, and learning to embrace the unexpected. She had started out as a woman who felt trapped by other people's expectations, but she had emerged as someone who knew her worth and wasn't afraid to fight for it. And as she looked ahead to the future, she felt a sense of excitement and possibility. Whatever came next, she knew she could handle it, because she had already proven to herself that she was stronger than she ever imagined. One crisp autumn morning, Emma woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing incessantly on the nightstand. She groggily reached for it, squinting at the screen. It was a message from her mother. "Can we talk today? It's important." Emma's heart skipped a beat. Her relationship with her parents had improved over the past year, but messages like this still made her uneasy. She showed it to Jake, who was already awake and sipping coffee by the window. "What do you think it's about?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. Jake shrugged, but his expression was calm. "Only one way to find out," he said. "But whatever it is, you've got this." Emma agreed to meet her parents later that afternoon, at a quiet park near their home. As she walked toward the bench where they were waiting, she noticed how much older they looked. Her father's hair had more gray than she remembered, and her mother's hands trembled slightly as she clutched her purse. They smiled when they saw her, but there was something in their eyes, something uncertain, almost fearful. "Thanks for coming," her mother said as Emma sat down. We have something to tell you." Emma's stomach churned. "What is it?" she asked, bracing herself for bad news. Her father took a deep breath. "We've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "About everything that's happened. The wedding, the way we treated you, all of it. And we realize that we've been holding on to a lot of guilt. We've been trying to make things right, but we know it's not enough." Emma frowned, confused. "What are you saying?" she asked. Her mother reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. She handed it to Emma, her hands shaking. "Open it," she said quietly. Emma's heart raced as she tore open the envelope. Inside was a letter and a check. Her eyes widened as she saw the amount. It was a significant sum of money, more than she had ever seen in her life. "What? What is this?" she stammered. Her father cleared his throat. "It's the money we saved for your wedding," he said. "The wedding we canceled. We've been holding on to it, thinking we'd use it for something else, but we realized it belongs to you. It's your money, Emma, and we want you to have it." Emma stared at the check, her mind reeling. "I don't understand," she said. "Why now?" Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "Because we finally understand how much we hurt you," she said, "and we want to make it right. Not just with words, but with actions. This money is yours to do whatever you want with. Start a business, buy a house, take a trip. It's our way of saying we're sorry, and we're proud of the person you've become." Emma felt tears welling up in her own eyes. She had spent so long feeling angry and hurt, but in that moment, all she felt was a deep, overwhelming sense of relief. Her parents weren't perfect, but they were trying, and that meant more to her than she had realized. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. This means a lot." They talked for a while longer, the conversation flowing more easily than it had in years. By the time Emma left the park, she felt lighter, as if a weight she hadn't even realized she was carrying had been lifted. She called Jake as soon as she got home, her voice filled with excitement. "You won't believe what just happened," she said, recounting the conversation with her parents. Jake listened quietly, then laughed. "That's amazing," he said. "What are you going to do with the money?" Emma thought for a moment. "I don't know yet," she said. "But I think I want to do something meaningful, something that honors everything we've been through." Over the next few weeks, Emma and Jake brainstormed ideas. They talked about starting a foundation to help other women who were struggling with family conflicts or financial control. They considered buying a small property where they could host retreats or workshops. But in the end, Emma decided to use the money to fund a passion project she had always dreamed of but never thought was possible: a book about her journey. She spent months writing, pouring her heart into every page. The book was raw and honest, detailing the pain of her parents' betrayal, the strength it took to stand up for herself, and the joy of finding love and independence. When it was finally published, the response was overwhelming. Readers from all over the world reached out to Emma, sharing their own stories and thanking her for giving them hope. Her parents even read the book, and while it was difficult for them to see their actions laid bare, they told her how proud they were of her courage. As Emma stood at a book signing event one evening, surrounded by readers and supporters, she felt a sense of fulfillment she had never known before. She had turned her pain into something beautiful, something that could help others. And as she looked out at the crowd, she saw Jake standing in the back, smiling at her with so much love and pride. She knew then that her journey had been worth it, every heartbreak, every struggle, every moment of doubt. Because in the end, it had led her here, to a life that was truly her own. Years passed, and Emma's life continued to evolve in ways she could have never imagined. Her book became a bestseller, and she found herself traveling the world to speak at conferences, sharing her story and inspiring others to take control of their lives. Jake was by her side through it all, his unwavering support giving her the strength to keep going. Together, they had built a life filled with love, purpose, and adventure. One sunny afternoon, Emma and Jake returned to the beach where they had gotten married. It had become a special place for them, a symbol of their resilience and the beginning of their journey together. As they walked along the shore hand in hand, Emma felt a deep sense of gratitude. She thought about everything they had been through, the challenges, the triumphs, the moments of doubt and joy. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't done this?" Jake asked, gesturing to the beach around them. Emma smiled. "All the time," she said. "But I wouldn't change a thing. This was our moment, our way of saying that no one else gets to decide our future." Jake nodded, squeezing her hand. "I'm glad we did it," he said. "It was the best decision we ever made." As they sat on the sand watching the waves roll in, Emma thought about her parents. Their relationship had come a long way since that difficult period. They weren't perfect, but they had made an effort to rebuild the trust they had broken. Emma had learned to set boundaries to protect herself while still leaving room for forgiveness. It wasn't always easy, but it was a balance she had come to accept. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emma pulled out her phone and scrolled through old photos. She paused on one from their wedding day, a candid shot of her and Jake laughing as the waves lapped at their feet. It was a moment of pure joy, a reminder of how far they had come. She showed it to Jake, who smiled. "We've come a long way," he said. "And we're just getting started." Emma leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling a sense of peace she had worked so hard to achieve. She knew that life would always have its challenges, but she also knew that she had the strength to face them. She had found her voice, her independence, and her happiness. And as she looked out at the endless ocean, she felt a deep sense of hope for the future. Whatever came next, she was ready, because she had already proven to herself and to the world that she was capable of anything.